So hello there guys and welcome back to a brand new episode of the DNF1 F1 podcast. I hope you're well. We have just had a crazy finish for this weekend's action at Monaco, and quite often we go into a podcast talking about races, specifically Monaco, where it's a little bit of a procession. We got absolutely nothing of the sort. There was red flags, there was crashes, there was weather changes, there was controversy from the stewarding, there was chaos from the FIA and trying to run the race as a whole together. So there's plenty of us to sort of get into, but in the end, after a crazy race, it was won by Sergio Perez, getting his first win of the season, his third of his career, and in a way, Red Bull certainly paying him back for the team orders that they put on him in Spain. So certainly a bit of redemption for him on a day where it seemed that the curse of Charles Leclerc at Monaco was going to be broken. Alas, it was to a degree, but more misfortune laid on him after an almost guaranteed race win for Charles Leclerc at his home circuit turned into a lackluster P4, unfortunately, for the Monegasque driver, who was certainly one that would have been hard to console after a difficult weekend. But of course, we're going to get into all of the action and everything that unfolded as it unfolded this weekend. And joining me on this podcast, as always, my DNF1 co-host, Courtney Pine and Lee Wannington. And just a reminder to you guys, we are the independent F1 podcast made by the fans and for the fans, as we bring you all of the latest news, gossip and events in the world of Formula One for your listening or viewing pleasure. And remember, if you're not first, you're probably DNF1. So guys, let's get into this one. And Courtney, I think it's fair to say that at the very least, it was quite a bit chaotic this weekend at Monaco, particularly in the race. And what are your thoughts after a strange race, but ultimately one that was won by possibly the right person when all is said and done?
Yeah, I mean, I was going into this weekend very apprehensive, as I usually do, about Monaco. I'm very public about my opinions on Monaco. I'm not keen on the race day at all. I think qualifying's amazing, not going to take it away, but the races themselves are usually dull, and a good section of the fan base were praying for rain, and we got exactly that just before the race. And obviously, chaos ensued. As a fan, I'm not happy with how it was dealt with overall. But overall, I think it was one of the better Monaco Grand Prix that we had, but that was primarily thanks to the rain that we had.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there's a timeline of how events went down. Of course, we were meant to start the race at around 2 o'clock UK time, 3 o'clock local time, of course. And one interesting comment that we heard during Martin Brundle's grid walk was from Alex Albon, who, despite a lot of people saying that we probably weren't going to get rain this afternoon, despite the fact that it seemed earlier in the week that it was almost a guarantee, he said that according to the Williams radar, we were going to get a huge shower of rain 5 minutes before the start of the race. And as it were, as Williams weather radar is obviously the GOAT of all weather radars in the F1 paddock, 5 minutes before the race started, we had a huge shower of rain, and it sent everybody into a bit of a frenzy. The teams were obviously trying to get their tyres changed, which brought out, in my opinion, what was the first delay when the race was suspended. And I think that was to provide teams with an opportunity to sort of put some wet tyres on their car, try and feel out what the conditions were going to be so that the race could start on the right tyres for all the teams. But then what was even more strange is we had even more delays when the weather was getting even heavier. And I believe what that was, because there was a waiting period where people were waiting to get underway and it was being suspended even further. Nobody knew what was going on. There was not really any proper communication from the stewards or the FIA. Turned out that they were affected by a power issue, which affected the lights, the starting mechanism, the klaxons and everything else, which caused all kinds of delays. It frustrated a lot of fans, it must be said. And it was a while before we got underway fully, but of course we'll get into that part a little bit later on. So I guess my question is on this one to Lee is, do you think that the stewards and the FIA probably should have communicated this better to fans? Because I was going through social media, I was tweeting on the DNF1 page, and a lot of people were very unhappy as to what was going down. It was an absolute mess.
Yeah, I mean, it should be better communication to the fans, especially you think of the paying customer at the grandstand sitting there and they're like, all right, you're paying, you're getting soaked, but you want to know what's going on. Why is it being delayed when this, especially at the beginning, it wasn't raining that heavy? I can understand the initial red flag because they did get quite torrential, but that was like 20 minutes after the supposed race start. So there was no communication on that aspect. But the entire weekend's been a bit messy, even through qualifying. Had the random red flag that really shouldn't have been a red flag. It's because a lone steward decided it was not race marshal, not even steward. Sorry, race marshal decided there was debris on the track and put the flag in because one marshal put the flag up, but they had to red flag the entire session. It just seemed chaotic and completely disorganized this weekend, and it's just a bit of a shambles when Monaco is trying to keep its space on the calendar.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you talk about the marshal, of course, when they raise a red flag during the qualifying session, you can't just undo it. You have to follow the procedure and start the session again, which I remember saying on the stream with Kira Megan, who was on the qualifying stream with us, that it might actually turn out to be a blessing in disguise for some drivers who were worried about losing a decent lap time, and then you had enough time to get the cars out and go again. Although if you were Pierre Gasly, you probably wouldn't have agreed that much, considering that he wasn't able to set a lap time as he just missed out. But it definitely summed up what was going on for the race ahead. And of course, it got to a point where when we had that huge torrential downpour, we were starting to get some Spa flashbacks from last season. There was a worry with a lot of fans that when is this race going to get going underway? Of course, the cars were following the safety car, then everybody coming to the pits. Then the rain stopped. The track was starting to dry up a little bit. It was still wet. So, of course, the question was, what tyres was everybody going to be able to start the race on? And it was delays and delays and delays and more delays. And given that we're at a venue which right now doesn't have a contract to host a race beyond this season just gone, even though there's nothing the organisers can do about it, it's certainly not going to be a good look for fans who they're trying to convince fans that this is still a great place to go racing and this should be on the F1 calendar. The stewards and the FIA weren't exactly doing themselves any favours when not only were all these delays that were being caused out of their control preventing a race from going ahead during a window where it probably should have done, weather-wise, but no one was communicating anything to the fans. We're all sitting there trying to figure out amongst ourselves what's going on. Even on commentary, we had Martin Brundle and Crofty going back and forth trying to figure out what the hell was going on.
Yeah, I mean, the whole thing with Monaco in general, Adam, I'm just going to use the first opportunity to express my prejudice towards Monaco in general. I think the main frustration I had, look, I can't speak on behalf of other people, just for me individually, the biggest frustration I had was going into the weekend, I was thinking, please, please, please let it rain, because if it doesn't rain, a dry race at Monaco is a procession. Most boring race of the season, no doubt whatsoever. So I was like, yes, it's going to rain now. And, after the first delay and the drivers went out for a couple of laps, it was too wet for the drivers to race on the track. And I do feel that one of the reasons why they're so quick to bring the drivers in is because of the nature of the circuit and it wouldn't be safe. So from my perspective, we have a real dilemma with Monaco going forward, because for me, I don't think it's fit for purpose, because in dry conditions, the drivers can't race, and in wet conditions, they can't race at all because the track is too tight and there's bound to be pile-ups. So for me, I do feel that with Monaco moving forward, it's going to lose its place on the calendar because it doesn't give us everything that we want over a race weekend. Or they're going to have to look at modifying a section of the circuit. Because I'm all about the history of Formula One and prestige and all that. I'm pro all those things. So if they were able to improve the track in a way that would help the racing, I'd be all for Monaco. And the only place I could really think of is maybe they could get rid of that chicane on the exit of the tunnel. I'm just playing devil's advocate here. I don't know whether it's there for safety reasons, but if they were to get rid of that chicane at the end of the tunnel and maybe have a DRS zone there, maybe there could be an opportunity for overtaking, because the cars there were times where the cars were tediously close to being able to overtake. It's just not enough, even with the regulation changes.
Yeah, it certainly leaves a lot to be asked with this circuit, because of course, these cars are getting bigger, they're getting a little bit wider, it's becoming increasingly difficult to overtake. I mean, we saw the F2 races earlier today, and it was already hard enough to overtake there. We saw a few moments, but of course there were certain mitigating circumstances that would allow that. In F1, you're not really going to be granted that luxury. And unfortunately, we are in that situation now with Monaco where we do have to ask that question. Is the circuit still fit for purpose for F1? Not necessarily for entertainment, because I think we can all agree that throughout F1's history, Monaco has never necessarily produced races which has been absolutely clustered with overtaking or memorable moments where people were trying to go for a late move on each other. It's mostly been about, that race between Senna and Mansell where they're following close each other. Of course, Ricardo's redemption race where he didn't have his MGUK and he had to hold back Vettel and Hamilton. And then, of course, Hamilton the following year after that with Verstappen. You get races like that. And usually that's the norm. And we got that today in the closing stages between the two Red Bulls and the two Ferraris, literally line of start with each other for the last 10 minutes or so, which is something we wanted for the whole race, but we never really got as a result. It does beg the question whether Monaco is still fit for purpose as an F1 circuit. And more importantly, what is the deal right now, guys, with wet weather in F1? Because it feels to me that in the past, and maybe this makes me sound like a bit like an old man moaning about this, but I remember growing up watching Formula 1 races in torrential conditions just like this. And we're talking about some of these drivers, well, all of these drivers are up there with the best drivers in the world. Now, I don't want to come across as miserable and, not with the times or anything where safety is paramount. That's not what I'm saying, but we've got all these mechanisms in place with these cars and the drivers and the tyres, more importantly, that should be allowing us to race in difficult conditions. And yet, more often than not, that is not the case. And no one's really asked that question because, quite frankly, guys, and I said this in the group chat as well, I don't see the point of the wet tyres. I mean, we got wet tyre running today, but there seems to be a fine threshold for when wet tyres are suitable for driving, conditions are suitable for wet tyres. It's almost like trying to have an avocado. And you can apply that to the intermediate tyres. It's like intermediate tyres like an avocado. It's like, it's not quite there yet. It's not quite there yet. It's not quite there yet. It's not quite... Oh, no, it's too wet. We have to go into pits. Like, you can't race. So, Lee, what are your thoughts on this one with Monaco? Is the circuit, in your opinion, still fit for purpose to host races in modern-day Formula 1? Forget the hosting fees or anything else. Just as a circuit on its own, is it still feasible to have races there?
I got to admit, it's probably not really feasible with a modern car without major changes. Obviously, like Corny said, the chicane coming out of the tunnel, but I think that was added for safety reasons to reduce speed. Obviously, in a narrow confines of a street circuit. But the problem is, Formula One is a high speed by its nature, and obviously, you look at some modern street circuits. I'm going to use Azerbaijan being the most recent one to join it as a proper street circuit. I mean, not going around a car park. Sorry, Miami. Going to Azerbaijan, they've got them using the massive roadways. Apart from you going through the old town, the roads are, as a street, they are 6-lane wide roads. So there's plenty, like the back straight in Baku, which we go into next. Plenty of room for overtaking. You can barely fit two Formula 1 cars side by side in Monaco. Well, obviously you can if they're perfectly placed there where they're not moving. You could, but it's just not that fit for purpose. But maybe something, obviously Formula 1's not going to be listening to this, but maybe something that we can think about as a special event, as a qualifying event only, with a special, just for the glory, so to speak, of I've had a Monaco fastest lap, and that's it, that's the event. And you've got something different. You're not having a race, it's a glory, maintaining the history and legacy of the sport. Because the fans enjoy the qualifying. It's the race that doesn't work. So obviously that's another way to look at it, but then that obviously then changes stats and things of having a special event. But obviously that's just my thought on that. The only thing I do add is obviously Monaco does have a real marina, but
yeah. That is something we've got to look towards to in their favour compared to, I mean, we gave Miami such a hard time over this. We have to equally praise Monaco for that. And I mean, it is what it is, Monaco. It's shrouded in heritage. It's shrouded in history. And look, I love Monaco. I am one of the Monaco defenders. I accept that the race is never... I mean, most of the time when you talk about Monaco, you'll talk about, as I said, some of those races of the past, those exciting, close battles, the tension where... Like 4 cars we saw today at one point separated by just a few seconds towards the end of the race. And you just think it only takes one mistake. You have to understand the focus and the tension that's going on in the drivers' heads. And there was a moment from Perez in the early part of the final stint where he did lock his brakes going into the hairpin, in the Lowe's hairpin. And you sort of think that, it's that added pressure that kind of makes it exciting. And of course, that comes into qualifying as well. This is why we touted it as the most exciting qualifying session of the season, because... You throw it all on the line, you make the smallest mistake, you end up doing what Perez and Sainz did on Saturday and both crashing and causing a red flag. So there is that huge risk element to it, and I think that draws a lot of people in. Unfortunately, you get a race like today and it does raise questions as whether or not Monaco is fit for modern F1, because the threshold for safety in terms of wet weather, and I'm not arguing against this, it's gone up massively in terms of what is acceptable for racing in wet conditions. Because, if you'd have had torrential conditions like that 15, 20 years ago, that'd have been fine. They'd have just gone around. I remember seeing much worse than that when I was growing up. And I'm not saying that that's okay, because of course certain things have happened.
Spa 98.
Yeah, well, exactly. I mean, painful memories, of course, as a Ferrari fan. But funny you picked that one out fresh up. But that was the one. That was the one in my mind as well. To be fairly, I must admit. So it is one of those questions I think have to be asked. And of course, we're going to get a resolution to this very, very soon. A lot of people were talking about this on the grid. I think it was Flavio Briatore was saying that there might actually be a deal announced in the next few weeks. I'm not quite sure how he has the inside track of all people. But the strange, heard stranger things these days. So we'll have to wait and see. But of course, we did get running after an hour or so. I think the race started at 3:00, if I remember right. And of course, in difficult conditions, we had a rolling start. All the pressure in the world was sitting on Charles Leclerc's shoulders, sitting in pole position in the Ferrari in his home circuit, a track where until today he'd never finished a race on, let alone win one. And for the early part of it, whilst it was difficult, it must be said that Ferrari did do a good job to the beginning of it. Like Leclerc and Sainz, they managed to hold their nerve, drive the race they needed to. They were managing the gaps of Red Bull, especially Charles Leclerc. But then, of course, it all started to come unstuck when the track started to dry, the conditions were changing. There was that question whether intermediate tyres were going to be suitable to go on. Pierre Gasly was on the intermediate tyres and he was doing a relatively good job on those. And then, of course, that's when things started to change. Lap 17, Sergio Perez, in my opinion, the pivotal moment in this race, puts on those intermediate tyres. And at this point, guys, I actually sent a message in the group chat, in the DNF1 group chat that we have, and I said, I think Red Bull may have gambled on Checo's race in a bid to try and protect Max or help Max. As it was, a few minutes later, we realised it turned out to be the move that won in the race. So what were you guys thinking at that point? Did you think it was a sensible move for Checo to go onto the intermediate tyres, or do you feel that they possibly went a bit too soon?
To be honest, whenever Red Bull make a bold strategy call, I 9 times out of 10 expect it to be right, because I'm sure it's something we're going to delve into a little bit later. But Red Bull are, for me, not even just this season, for as long as I remember, I think Red Bull are the best teams in terms of strategy. Let's not forget, famously in Abu Dhabi, as much as people have their opinions on what happened, it was a bold strategy called by Red Bull that put Max in that position to overtake Lewis and win that championship. But that's one of many, many examples where Red Bull, even when they haven't had the car, Red Bull are always able to get those bold strategy decisions right. And obviously, the pit stops they do are rapid as well. And that's always been a strength for Red Bull. So, yeah, when I saw that they made that decision for Perez, I'm like, here we go, let the games begin. And then obviously that turned out to be the case.
Yeah, absolutely. And he got him into a position where he got track position. He undercut not only Carlos Sainz, but Charles Leclerc, which surprised a lot of people because Leclerc pitted a lap later, found himself behind Perez, and then it all started to unfold for him as the strategy blunders from Ferrari seemed to worsen from then on there. But we'll get onto that in just a moment. But let's talk about Checo Perez's performance this weekend. Of course, he looked mega quick. He certainly was the faster of the two Red Bulls, which was a surprise to a lot of people, but managed his tyres very well. And you could argue quite strongly that his race win this weekend was very much deserved, and as it stands, puts him back in the championship hunt. And quite interestingly, of course, we should mention that a lot of people were talking about the team orders, us included in Spain, and that was it too premature to order Checo to let Max through to try to win the Grand Prix for the championship. As it stands right now, with a 15-point gap now between Max and his teammate Checo, if they'd not done that and let Checo and Max fight and Checo had won that Grand Prix, he'd be 1 point behind his teammate in the championship right now. So I guess the question is, guys, first of all, of course, what did you make of Checo's performance today in particular, and how impressed were you by him? But also, is it now, are Red Bull now in a position where they can't really give any more team orders now? They have to let their guys race. Lee, I'm going to come to you first on that one.
Firstly on Checo's drive, it was a brilliant drive. Obviously, one of his strengths has always been tyre management and knowing how to use the tyres and get the best use out of them, and especially in changeable conditions. It's something he does succeed at, or excel at, I should say. But it's such a great drive from him. I mean, how the step that Sergio's taken from last year to this year has been amazing. He's put himself up. You think about if he had better luck in Jeddah, he could have won 3 Grand Prix this year. And obviously the team orders last weekend. He could have won 3 of the 7. That's actually quite a good thing to think about as Sergio. It's like he could have won 3. He could have been leading the championship. And you don't have well, obviously we haven't been able to say that about Sergio many times in his career. Well, we haven't in his career because he hasn't been in a top car. So it's really nice to see him performing well and getting the best out of that car, especially on a day when Max has always been behind Sergio throughout the entire weekend. He just hasn't been on top of the car. So whereas for Red Bull, having the number 2 driver filling in when the number 1 can't get the maximum out of the car, that's what they need as a team. So it's been just a great performance from Sergio to get today's win.
And Courtney, what are your thoughts on the race today?
Yeah, with Sergio Perez, he's finally got the car that suits him. You know, that was always a theory that you had when he was struggling last season. That obviously, where he was new to the team, the car suited Max a lot better. You know, even the development of the car suited Max a lot more. This season, he's very much a part of the furniture at Red Bull. Seems a lot more comfortable. You can tell that he's a well-respected figure within the team, and I think the result this afternoon, for a Red Bull perspective, was well deserved because he had the better of Max all weekend, all the way through the practice sessions. There was a couple of moments where Max looked like he got a bit closer, but Sergio Perez has been a better driver all weekend. And I mean, going forwards, you know, I saw the interview with Christian Horner afterwards saying that, well, you know, Sergio Perez is getting closer to Max Verstappen now, so you know it's not going to be easy for us. I think we all know that they're going to be favouring Max Verstappen throughout the season. You know, I'd love them to give both drivers a chance, but Red Bull is very much Max Verstappen's team, and it's the reason why Daniel Ricciardo left. You know, it's no secret that team is definitely Max Verstappen's. So I just think going forward, I think Sergio Perez will continue being a good number 2 driver. As Lee just put perfectly, if Max Verstappen isn't on the ball, Red Bull are going to be more confident that Sergio Perez will be able to take points off Leclerc and Sainz.
Well, this is it. And I think that point sums it up completely, Courtney, because you could argue to some degree this weekend that Max Verstappen was the 4th fastest guy on the track this weekend. And Checo really picked up where Red Bull might have thought Max Verstappen would have been this weekend, and that's kind of what they need. And Perez has been like that for a lot of times this season. He's really upped his game. He seems to be enjoying this new car a lot better than the 2021 car. Obviously, there's a lot of rumours going around as to whether or not Checo is going to be staying with the team. I can't see any reason why that wouldn't be the case. I think this win may have just been the icing on the cake for him. So right now, Red Bull seem to be in a very strong position. The car's looking quick. The drivers are quick. They may not have the fastest car right now. Ferrari may have stolen a march on him in that regard, and a very small one at that. But it seems right now that Red Bull, strategy-wise and the ability to take the maximum out of what they have available to them, is the key factor in why they're winning both championships right now, because this is the 5th win for Red Bull this season. And you could argue on the swing of things that they've taken 2 wins away from Ferrari in Spain and Monaco, and that could be key in this championship. Lee, what are your thoughts to that? Do you feel Red Bull right now are capitalising on Ferrari's errors, or do you feel that they're actually forcing those errors with their own strategy behind the pit wall?
It's probably a bit of both. As Courtney didn't mention earlier, that Red Bull have always been on it operationally, strategically, pit stops. That's always been one of Red Bull's strengths. Well, at least in the last decade or so, obviously, when they joined the sport, I can't actually remember how good their pit stops were in 2007 or their strategy, to be honest. But they're always been up there. So on the best out on the grid. But Ferrari, regardless of how quick their car had been over the recent seasons, have been terrible on strategy, terrible in the pit stops, terrible in just other parts of the operation, the upgrade races, which is part of the reasons why they fast the car against the Mercedes in 2017 and 18. Vettel didn't win the title because they beat themselves. And obviously the Mercedes caught up and the Mercedes outraced them. And Red Bull seems to be doing that again to Ferrari, that They've come from behind. Ferrari may still have the slightly fast car, but they're beating them operationally because Ferrari are still failing to get on top of their operational issues that they've just had for a decade or so.
Yeah, absolutely right. And it seems that despite having this new young team, Ferrari are not winning this battle against Red Bull right now. And it could prove to be the crucial one that needs to be won in this championship where the drivers and cars are cancelling each other out race to race. Let's talk a little bit about Max Verstappen. Obviously, it wasn't his best weekend. It was the first time this season that he's finished a Grand Prix and not taken the checkered flag as the race winner. But overall, did what he needed to do, finished ahead of his main rival in Charles Leclerc this weekend, despite not having the pace compared to him at all, ends up with a solid P3 podium. So a little bit more of a margin in the championship in his favour. How did you rate Max Verstappen's weekend, Courtney?
Wasn't the best, but I remember something that Mercedes always used to say when they used to go to tracks like Monaco and Singapore where they weren't as strong, like particularly in that 17-18 battle with Vettel, they always used to say it's all about damage and limitation when you're not at your best, and that's exactly what Max Verstappen did this weekend. I think we're going to look back on this weekend thinking, you know what, I think even towards the end of the season, I think we're going to look back on this weekend as a vital one for Max Verstappen in this championship because, you know, he still ended up outscoring his main rival. And it just shows, it does just show how good a driver Max Verstappen is that even on a bad day, he finishes on the podium. So I just think Red Bull are just in such a good place at the moment and Ferrari really need to be sorting the things out if they want to be standing in this championship battle.
Yeah, very much so. Before we go on to Ferrari, we should take a quick moment to mention that at the moment, as we are recording this, there's currently a steward's inquiry or investigation owing to two instances, one for each driver, that Ferrari have launched a protest against. Now, the details of this is that Ferrari launched a protest to the stewards in claiming that both Max Verstappen and Sergio Perez, on exiting the pit lane, both of them crossed the pit lane exit line before they reached the white line. So, of course, you have the yellow line separating the track from the pit lane exit, and then there's a white line which joins the two together where the guy coming out the pits can rejoin the racetrack. According to Ferrari, both Max Verstappen and Sergio Perez crossed that line or went to the wrong side of that yellow line, on the left side rather than stay to the right, which is a breach of Article 11.7. Now, I'll read this out just because it's a little bit boring, so I'll try and quote this as quick as I can. But in the race director's notes, Article 11.1, in accordance with Chapter 4, Section 5 of Appendix L of the ISC, drivers must keep to the right-hand side of the solid yellow line at the pit exit when leaving the pit, and stay to the right of this line until it finishes after turn 1, Saint Devot. According to the replay, we saw one instance of Max Verstappen where he did have a little bit of a slide on the way out, and it did look like one of his left front tyre crossed that yellow line, or it didn't stay to the right of that line. We didn't see if he'd gone over that yellow line, but he certainly wasn't to the right of that line. We didn't see any footage of Perez, and I'll be honest, guys, I was a bit surprised that this wasn't actually brought up during the race, because we saw a few replays of it, but the stewards didn't look into this. It's only until Ferrari have protested this, and Christian Horner, of course, let Sky F1 because he's a pundit now for Sky. I thought they were going to. No, it's true though. I thought they were going to be covering everybody, like all the pit walls. Martin Brundle saw Toto for the first time in ages. It's had Mattia Binotto on a few times, but it seems to be Christian Horner every other week. I mean, I'm one of the few people that don't mind hearing from Christian Horner when he's not having a rant and he's just doing his job on the pit wall. But at the same time, it seems a bit weird. They keep coming to him all the time. I'm hoping he's getting paid for pundit fees because he's on there more than Nico Rosberg is at the moment, and that's saying something. Anyway, look, I digress on that. But it is quite interesting what's going on because this could have an impact on the race result. And as I said, as it stands, I believe Max Verstappen and Sergio Perez, from what I've been hearing, were both summoned to the stewards about an hour ago from the time that this is being recorded right now. I'm guessing they're probably going to be talking about what happened or why they may have crossed the line, if that is indeed what they did. We'll find out what the result of that, but that could produce a potential 5-second time penalty. If that proves to be the case, that will change the result because both Leclerc and Sainz were within 5 seconds of the race leader, Sergio Perez, which means that if they both get given a time penalty, Ferrari will end up getting a 1-2 in favour of Carlos Sainz, which would be a strange way for Sainz to win his first Grand Prix and will have implications on the championship. So just brought that one in. I'm going to quickly go to you guys because I know you're watching the race as well. Courtney, Lee, quick one. We only saw the Max Verstappen incident. Didn't see one about Perez, but we know it was noted. Wasn't quite sure what it was referring to. I'm guessing it was this. But what are your thoughts on this? Did you think that Max Verstappen went over the line or to the wrong side of it? What are your thoughts on it?
I think my main concern as content creators, I think that's what we are. We're talking about a result that might change. I think the thumbnail, the topics of conversation are just going to have massive asterisks right next to them if this result is overturned. But you can't blame Ferrari because I don't mean to be funny. I think Red Bull are notorious whingers. So I'm not going to lie, it'd give me great satisfaction, apart from Sergio Perez, because I think Sergio Perez is probably one of the few likable features about Red Bull. It'd be a shame for Sergio Perez, but I'm not going to lie, it'd give me great satisfaction to see Red Bull get Red Bulled, to be honest. But it just make the episode a lot more difficult for you to edit, Adam. So I'm sure you have mixed feelings on it.
Well, I mean, it's one of those where I totally understand it. I know that if Ferrari had done it, Red Bull or any other team, it doesn't really matter who teams are involved. These are the sorts of things that we expect to see. I mean, we saw a lot of this back and forth between Red Bull and Mercedes last season. Christian Horner, when he was told about this, he understood it, but I'm pretty sure he'd have appealed it if it was the other way round. So at this moment, guys, whilst we're talking about Checo Perez has won the Monaco Grand Prix, we still aren't 100% sure that that's the case. It still could change, and at some point, and I'm checking Twitter right now to get live updates. At the moment, we're still not sure what the stewards are going to decide, but we could get to a point in this podcast where I have to interrupt and say, actually, it's been overturned, and Carlos Sainz is the winner of the Monaco Grand Prix. So
that would be typical for Carlos to get. He got his first podium after a penalty, so he gets his potential first race win.
Yeah, he's quite used to having to wait after a race to get in. Obviously, his first podium in Brazil, where he had to wait for a penalty to go in his favour, and of course that could end up. It would be the most Carlos Sainz thing ever. Based on that, if he was to end up winning his first Grand Prix, not only that, the Monaco Grand Prix.
Did he get on the podium?
Yeah, mate, that's it. And Charles Leclerc weren't even on the podium in his home race and then might end up with a P2 and, of course, be level on points with Max Verstappen when the points all sort themselves out. So this is actually quite an important one, and it could turn out to be the best strategic masterclass that Ferrari have pulled off this weekend. We'll have to wait and see. On the subject of Ferrari and strategic masterclass, and not many of them, this proves to be the only decision they've made that actually might help them here, but despite having arguably the best car this weekend, Charles Leclerc in imperious form. He really was something, especially in qualifying. At one point in that second qualifying lap in Q3 where he could have got even faster, Mattia Binotto was saying he was as far as 3/4 of a second up on his previous time going into back. So he could have been easily into the mid 110s, which would be incredible to see if he'd have pulled that one off. I was kind of wincing, hoping that he'd just get pole and wouldn't cause the red flags. When I saw that, I was right, oh God, hopefully it's not Leclerc. And then I saw Perez and I thought, okay, fair enough. I sort of calmed down a little bit there. But overall, another disappointing performance from Ferrari from a strategic point of view. The drivers did the best job they possibly could, but ultimately more disappointment. So guys, I know we've talked about this already, but for Charles Leclerc and Carlos Sainz right now, especially for Charles Leclerc, who was driving brilliantly this weekend, and of course did so in Spain before the reliability issues, it really feels right now that whilst Red Bull, so far from what we can see until we're told otherwise, they've paid Checo back for what happened in Spain, Ferrari look like they owe Leclerc big time right now because they've cost him 2 race wins for totally different reasons. So what are your thoughts on this weekend for Ferrari?
I think at the beginning of the season, we were asking 2 questions of Ferrari because it was obvious that they had a fast car. The first question was, are they going to be able to sustain a development more with Red Bull? So far, so good. I do believe that Ferrari have a pace advantage over Red Bull at the majority of circuits at this point of the season. So great for that. The second thing is, and I think it's actually the more important thing, is are Ferrari going to be able to move on from Banter era Ferrari, where they make simple errors at the most important moments, and they seem to, for the last couple of races, they seem to have been like new Ferrari, not only pace wise, they seem to have ironed out the creases, let's say. But over the past couple of races, they've been clumsy, to say the least. And referring to what I said about Red Bull, they cannot afford to be making these kind of mistakes because when they do, they're going to get punished by a Red Bull team who are just fantastic when it comes to strategy and pit stops. and up against Max Verstappen. Max Verstappen is one of the best drivers in the world. He's had an off day today. For me, for Charles Leclerc, it's a double-edged sword. Not only has he missed out on a home win, he's also missed out on sustaining like maximum damage on Max Verstappen on one of the rare occasions where he's off his game. So Ferrari have messed up massively this weekend.
Yeah, it looks like they have done. And of course, it summed it all up when throughout the race, of course, the key part of it was the Ferraris both staying out, not taking the inters with a view to going straight to the dries, because it looked like inevitably that was the plan. And that's what Ferrari looked like what they were going to do. Then they're asking Sainz in on the radio. He's saying, no, I want to stay out to put on the dries. I think we're going to be fine for slicks. I'll manage it and we'll go and put the slicks on. Ferrari were trying to convince him to come in. And then he said, no, we got to stay out. And then in the end, they sort of conceded and think, okay, fair enough. Charles Leclerc, after the race, said he was doing the same thing. He said, no, I wanted to stay on and put on the dries, but they convinced me to come in. Then they put Charles on the inters. That lost him a place to Perez because they were too slow to react to that. So they probably should have just stayed on the wets anyway and do what Sainz did. And then they put Sainz onto the dry tyres, but then call Leclerc in to double stack, which made no sense at all because they got into that period where the overcut was more powerful, where Verstappen gained a place on Leclerc, and at the last second they're trying to tell Leclerc to stay out. It was almost a Ferrari version of the in incident with Hamilton in Germany a few years back.
That.
But it was too late. Leclerc, you could hear him shouting on the radio, waving his hand about as he was coming in, and then it all culminated in Leclerc going from first, literally all the way down to fourth in a race that literally he had in his hands, and he was driving beautifully in the difficult conditions. He was easily the fastest on track, and ultimately, unless we get some last-minute change in results owing to what's going on with Red Bull right now, it looks very, very likely that Charles Leclerc has lost even more ground, and in a weird way, probably feels even worse coming fourth in this race than he did retiring in the other races in Monaco, because I don't know if he's going to get a better chance to win in Monaco than he got today. So, guys, Lee in particular, what have Ferrari got to do to try and turn this around for Charles Leclerc and for Carlos Sainz as well? Because right now it seems that the drivers are doing everything they can, including calling the strategies, and the team are just, for one reason or another, are just making the mistakes for them.
Well, the easiest answer for that is Ferrari need to hire the strategist from Red Bull. that will fix their problem.
Yeah, I mean, I can't believe we didn't think of that one. It's so simple. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, let's do that one. I'll call
all the teams hired other members from the other teams, so that's the easiest. They've got a problem. You buy your competition out effectively. So there you go. That's my suggestion on what they need to do. But no, in all serious matter, it is just whatever system or processes they use, they're just not on the top level competition. As we have obviously stated. So it's just I'm just lost for words on what they can do to improve it. It's just the problem they've had. And you think back to the times when Sebastian was driving for Ferrari, and the amount of times he had to tell the Ferrari pit wall on how to drive the race, and obviously he didn't have all the information on the best strategy and the best run, but he was telling them what to do because they had no idea, and Ferrari still have no idea.
Yeah, this is it. I mean, Mattia Binotto was saying on the radio, like, he apologised to Charles Leclerc and said, we will pay you back for this, And you could tell by Leclerc's interview with Sky Sports when he was talking to Natalie Pinkham, you could tell what he really wanted to say, but of course he's just trying to be diplomatic and try to be a team player, but he really wanted to let loose on his team, because I don't want to be too harsh on Ferrari at times. I know I do carry a bias in this, but they really let their guys down today, big time. And this could be the defining factor in this championship. It may not necessarily come down to who has the best car or who has the best drivers on any given day. It may change one way or the other and ebb and flow throughout the course of this season, as it often did last season between Verstappen and Hamilton with Red Bull and Mercedes. But right now, Red Bull clearly have not only the best interest of their drivers at hand, but I'm not saying that Ferrari don't, but they seem to have the plan figured out and they can react to changeable situations and get the best result possible. And that's what they've done. Ferrari, as it stands, it's not even a case of damage limitation. It's a case of they're actually tripping over themselves and creating their own problems by second-guessing each other. Courtney, what are your final thoughts on Ferrari before we move on?
I think another thing worth mentioning in this championship battle is, this is where my bias might come in. I do feel it's only a matter of time before Mercedes are in the game. And if, we're talking about Ferrari making these mistakes, you go later on in the season and Mercedes are up there with them, they make these kind of mistakes, they're going to be losing even more points, because look at the way that George Russell's racing this season. If he gets a sniff or an opportunity to get ahead of the Ferrari boys, he's going to take it. So Ferrari really need to be up in their game, because they might look back, let's say, particularly if Mercedes catch up, they could look back on Spain and Monaco as real defining moments of the season. They need to be faultless for the rest of the season now, I feel, because if they make the mistakes, they're not going to have the Red Bulls over them. But I do think eventually, I think the Mercedes boys are going to be there as well. And it's just going to be, if Ferrari mess up this season, I feel the pressure from the fan base is going to build again. And that's obviously a direction Ferrari don't want to be going in. They set out a clear precedent a few years ago. Give us time. We're gonna be back. A couple of seasons of pain, and we're gonna be back. They're back, and I think expectations are high because the fans know they have the car. If they fail this season, that pressure cooker environment will start returning again.
Yeah, absolutely agree with those sentiments, and of course, you share those with a lot of fans that Mercedes, it does seem at some point they will come back. When that will be, we don't know. But of course, the last thing Ferrari need right now is to have to worry about another team in the mix. Right now, they're struggling to sort of outfox Red Bull at this point, and they're doing a superb job. Ferrari, as it stands, need to be doing better. So hopefully for their sake, that can continue, and they will do better in the upcoming races. Plenty of races to go, we should stress. So there's plenty of time for them to get this right. Let's talk about some of the other teams in this race this weekend. Starting with Mercedes, a circuit that I certainly predicted, and it was an unpopular one, but I certainly predicted that Mercedes would have trouble this weekend. I just felt that the car, despite how much it seemed to have improved in Spain, wasn't quite yet on the level of Red Bull and Ferrari. I still felt there was some way to go, but I also thought Monaco, historically, is not an easy track for Mercedes to do well on. It just doesn't seem to suit the characteristics of their car, and that's understandable, because you don't set up your car or design your car before the season starts to be fast at Monaco. You don't design the car to be fast at Monza. You design it to be fast at most traditional consistent circuits throughout the course of the season, and that's what wins your championships. You can be fast at one or two circuits, but if you're not fast at 19 or 20 over 22 rather than be fast at 2, you're not going to win the World Championship. I mean, we saw that with Ferrari last year. They were fast in Baku, they were fast at Monaco. That was about it. And they didn't win either of those races. So ultimately, it didn't matter. So in Mercedes' case, this looked like it might be a difficult weekend, but I think overall, they grew into the weekend. They grew into the race. The changeable conditions played a bit of an equaliser for them to some degree. And as the race panned out, I would say they did as well as they possibly could, the drivers. Strategy did, and conditions didn't really help Lewis in this case. I thought he did as good a job as he could. He was just a bit unfortunate. George Russell, on the other hand, getting a solid P5. Once again, keeping up that record of being the only driver so far this season to finish in the top 5 in every race. So, first things first, guys, what did we make of Mercedes weekend? And given where they were in qualifying, in retrospect to everybody else, could you consider this weekend to be a success?
I think overall it will be. I was interested in some of the comments, something else that you mentioned on the group chat, the comments that Lewis Hamilton made in the pre-race interview about how, they're still experimenting. I still feel there's such a big learning curve with this concept that they've developed. And it does seem that they are experimenting with both the drivers. So obviously there are going to be times where Lewis seems to be on top, and other where George seems to be on the top. It does seem that George is more comfortable with the car overall. But I think for those that are just like the typical boring remarks saying that Lewis is a finished driver, etc., I think it runs a lot more deeper than just the results seen on track. But I do feel that overall, both of the drivers will be happy. Still, it's slow progress, but progress nonetheless from the team. I just think George Russell really does deserve the credit that he's getting. He really has been fantastic for that team. And if for whatever reason Mercedes find themselves in a Constructors' Championship battle, they have George Russell primarily to thank for that.
Yeah, very much so. Lewis has had a lot of bad luck. I mean, he's almost been as unlucky. Well, he's probably been the unluckiest driver on the grid so far, perhaps other than Alonso and Leclerc to a degree. But Lewis has been very unfortunate, and he certainly could have got better results if he had a bit more fortune than George has had. But that shouldn't take anything away from what George Russell has done this season. I think he's solidified once again another great performance, and it's culminated in what was a difficult qualifying session, damage limitation, managed to put that Mercedes as the best of the rest. And I think Mercedes will be very happy with that. Towards the end of the race, he certainly was showing he had some pace still in that car, and it was growing. He did have to fend off Lando Norris at the very end, who went on a very aggressive tyre strategy, which almost paid off for him. Perhaps at other circuits it might have done, but ultimately another few more points on the board for Russell, and of course Lewis getting some points as well. Lee, what did you make of this Grand Prix this weekend? Do you agree with Courtney? It was a bit more successful than a failure this weekend, and where did Mercedes go from here?
Well, it was. Well, I know in the preview, Adam, I didn't think Mercedes would do too well, but they would still be the third best team. Then they probably still were the third best team overall. Just for Lewis, he was stuck in a Alpine sandwich towards that part of the race, and it just obviously just in that regard with the Alpine and Lewis, it shows you with the new cars, you still can't overtake. In Monaco, Lewis was behind Ocon, and he was behind Alonso. He was all over the back of them, but he couldn't get past. Hence the damage Lewis got with Ocon because of the two incidents. So that goes back to the conversation we were having earlier of if it's still suitable, but I'm not going to obviously repeat that. But George has just done really well. And obviously the big fight of getting ahead of Lando, Mercedes pulled that off. So they maximised the damage limitation. So that was successful strategically for George. And so you could say that it was a successful damage limitation. The overall we know the car is a better race car than a qualifying car. So obviously the season's been just damage limitation, but Mercedes have proven time and time again so far this season that they're good at doing the damage limitation, and especially in Georgia at the moment, leading that damage limitation to the maximum. So I would say they'd be pleased with that result. Obviously, it's not what they want, but it's better than it could have been. Well, no, it's better than it could have been. Yeah.
Yeah, I think 5th and 8th. If Mercedes were offered that after Friday practice, probably would have took that. They certainly looked like they were struggling for pace. The car was bouncing all over the place, and on the streets of Monaco, it was just very, very difficult for them. They just could not get anywhere near where they thought they might be. But ultimately, the race did come to them. It came to George in particular. Strategy seemed to work out well for him. He took his opportunities, and it was a great performance from George Russell once again. It's something that he's been consistently doing. I think I remember hearing Crofty calling him Mr. Sunday on the podcast. Not on the podcast, during the race, contrary to what he was often called as Mr. Saturday for his qualifying performances. He seems to have transferred that over into the race, which is great for him. On the subject of Sir Lewis, of course, had a bit of a helmet change halfway through the race. I didn't notice this at first until someone actually brought it up, but obviously was donning a special crash helmet this weekend, a sort of white helmet with some details on it. I'm sorry, I didn't really read up on this. But
crystals, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was something that was quite important to him, and I do apologise because there was a lot of different helmets this weekend, so it was quite hard to keep track of who was doing what. And it was quite a noticeable one for Lewis Hamilton. It almost looked like the Stig from the old Top Gear show was driving around in that Mercedes rather than Lewis himself. But there you go. But Lewis got stuck behind Alonso for a lot of that final stint, and it really did impact him as Alonso was just managing his size and then pulled away towards the end of the race. It was quite strange that Alonso was pretty much redefining the trolley train for many years. I think he had as many as everyone up to 18th place from 7th, where he was, all following behind him, which obviously caused problems for the leaders when they caught up to him to lap him later on in the race. But what did we make of that incident between Lewis and Ocon? Do you agree with the steward's decision in that Ocon turned in on Lewis and it was a 5-second penalty for Ocon?
It's just another issue with Monaco. I think at a normal race that situation wouldn't have occurred. It probably would have been deemed as a racing incident on another circuit, but I just think, I know we'll probably be going on to Alpine in a moment, but I just feel that there were two instances with both of the Alpine drivers' races are fundamental issues with Monaco. But again, that's something we'll probably go on to a little bit later. But yeah, I just feel that it could have been a lot worse for Lewis. That's actually probably the one bit of good luck he had going for him this week, the fact that there was a red flag, which means he's able to repair his damaged front wings. So despite the frustrations of being stuck behind Fernando Alonso, things could have been worse for him.
What about you, Lee? What did you make of that penalty for Ocon? Do you think that was a fair one, or do you think that perhaps Lewis could have backed off into turn 1?
I think it was probably on the harsher side of things, but saying that Ocon could have left more room considering where Lewis had placed himself going up the starting straight. I'll say straight, it's not really straight, but you know what I mean. He could have left more space for Lewis because Lewis was clearly indicating he was going to go down the inside quite far back from the corner. So in that sense, you could argue the stewards are right that he did turn on because he closed the door quite late. But it did feel more on the harsher side for him.
I actually agree with the decision. I remember seeing the replay. Lewis was saying that Ocon turned him on him. I think that's kind of what happened. I think Ocon allowed Lewis to get to a position where he was allowed to put enough of his car on the inside to warrant some racing room, especially in those difficult conditions. And Ocon simply just didn't give him it. And he was the one that caused the contact. So I would say that's probably a fair cop really on that one. And it caused Lewis some damage, which impacted his race. And I just looked at it and I thought, I'm usually quite 50-50 on some of these, depending on how far along the car is. But I think Ocon left the door open. At a track like Monaco, you've got to go for it. So I would say he should have given Lewis a bit more room into the corner, and it was him that caused the contact. So, no, I thought there was a fair penalty against Esteban Ocon on that one. We should talk about Alpine a little bit more, of course, because that incident did cost Ocon some points. That 5-second time penalty relegated him to 12th place. And Fernando Alonso, of course, despite what we were worried that his pace might falter and was holding Lewis up, if anything, he was doing it strategically to look after his tyres in that stint and then just pulled away. So Alonso had some pace in this weekend. It's amazing how Alpine started the weekend all over the place on Friday. They were really, really poor. The engineers, in their own words, had a bit of a nightmare trying to sort it all out. And then they ended up with two cars solidly in the top 10, at least pace-wise, so it seemed. And Fernando Alonso, once again, proving that he's still got quite a bit of speed about him, especially around Monaco.
Yeah, I think you look at Alpine this season, I know they're not exactly where they'd like to be. I think they're one of the teams that are hoping to benefit from the regulation changes and a new team coming into the fore, as we usually see after a big regulation change. But I do feel that where they are in the championship standings aren't representative of their true pace, because I think Fernando Alonso in particular has had so much bad luck this season that maybe some of us have underestimated Alpine just by looking at the standings. So I think Fernando Alonso will be happy with the performance, but this is going to be my last Monaco rant of the other side, I promise. The fact that a driver was allowed to go 3 seconds a lap slower and not get punished for it tells you everything that's wrong with Monaco on a Sunday. It's ridiculous. And it just, for me, it just looked comical at times.
Yeah, very much so. And sometimes you like to see stuff like that just for the vibes or banter or whatever, but ultimately it is quite frustrating from a racing perspective. And I can't imagine how annoying it must have been for Sir Lewis Hamilton, who's so often used, a 3-time winner here, of course, let's not forget, so often used to being at the front and trying to come back and make some overtakes happen. And it seemed for a while, the way he was driving, I thought you could pull some of them off, but unfortunately he was just in that lull where there was nothing he could really do about it, and it was all down to the characteristics of the circuit. So a very frustrating weekend for him. Hopefully for Mercedes' sake they can sort of put that to the back of their mind. For Alpine, of course, as I said, points won for Alonso, points lost for Ocon. He ended up losing a few points, which promoted Bottas, Vettel and Gasly ahead of him. Of course, the first two getting points this weekend. So no Bottas podium, unfortunately, but you never know. You sort of go for it sometimes, but Alfa Romeo just didn't seem to have the pace. Let's talk about McLaren before we do the last few parts of this episode. Contrasting weekend once again for them. And it always seems to be Lando Norris that seems to find the pace. For whatever reason, Ricardo just doesn't seem to have it right now, but we'll get into that momentarily. But Lando Norris, still not 100% following that tonsillitis diagnosis that he had last week and really affecting the Spanish Grand Prix. Equally, again, wasn't able to talk to many people. We did hear from him a few more times throughout the race, so he seemed like he was feeling a bit better. But once again, another strong performance from Lando, P6, and the fastest lap, of course, no less. So that's certainly a good number of points for him. It seemed like the McLaren was one of the better cars this weekend, especially the ride of the car. It seemed like it was stable. The car was working the way that they wanted it to, and it allowed at least Lando Norris to extract the pace out of it that he wanted to. So I think McLaren can be pretty happy once again with his performance. It's almost customary now that we're expecting this from McLaren and Lando, and he's really started to find his groove again, as he often did last season.
Yeah, I think Lando Norris needs a winning car now. He's got the talent. We're looking at drivers like Carlos, I'm thinking, when the hell is this guy going to win a race? You know, he has the talent to do it. And Lando's definitely one of those drivers. I think it's. I'll probably repeat myself. I feel like I say every race review, but it's because Lando Norris, like George Russell, is being so consistent. Whenever the opportunities are there, he takes them. And if you're looking, I don't know, for whatever reason, say Sergio Perez, for example, I don't know, abruptly said, I'm gonna retire at the end of the season. Lando Norris would be one of the first drivers that a team like Red Bull would be looking at. So it's just important for McLaren. No, he's tied down to a long-term contract. It's really important for McLaren to develop that car and give Lando a race-winning car, because I think the lad, you know, we've been praising George Russell a lot this season. It's sometimes easy to forget about Lando Norris because, you know, the McLaren isn't quite up there with the Mercedes. But Lando Norris, I just feel if he was given the right machinery, he would be in the same discussions as your Max Verstappen, your Leclerc, your George Russells. If those all in equal machinery, you'd be seeing a championship battle between those and obviously Lewis as well.
Yeah, I think so too. And it's important to remember with someone like Lando Norris. And, you know, he's still one of the youngest guys on the grid. And he's driving to such a high level right now. I mean, we saw last season at the Austrian Grand Prix, I think it was, that Lewis said this guy's a great driver, you know, paying huge compliments to him. And seeing what he's doing right now, almost going under the radar, because of course the big stories right now are between Ferrari, Red Bull, Charles Leclerc, Max Verstappen, of course, and Mercedes with their woes. And as Toto Wolff said right now, it's a difficult car. We're just going to have to do the best we can. And sometimes it's not bad to be wrong. You kind of overlook what Lando Norris is doing right now in a McLaren, which, for argument's sake, is a decent car balance-wise, but just doesn't quite have the pace of the lead cars, and some weekends can be a bit all over the place. So I think we really need to take into account what a great job he's doing. And I'm going to put the question to you both on this one with Lando Norris, because I said during the qualifying stream, and I asked Kira this when she was on it with me, if there was a seat available at, say, Mercedes and Red Bull, two teams that may have a slot available in the next year or two, depending on what happens with one of their drivers, would you be looking at Lando Norris? Because I think right now, he's the number one driver on that grid that I think should be looked at for going to a top team. And I don't mean that as disrespect to McLaren, but I just wonder if McLaren can actually provide Lando with the machinery that he needs to compete for race wins and world championships. Because right now, the way he's driving, that's the only missing ingredient for him. Lee, more than welcome.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'll let you weigh on that one first.
Oh, thank you. No, I would definitely say be looking at Lando as the number one on your wish list. So yeah, I think they'd be silly not to look at them if there was a seat available.
And
I've said previously, I think if a seat at Red Bull or Ferrari would become available, or, you know, say Lewis was to announce his retirement at the end of the season, which I'm still not going to completely rule out, you know, if Lewis Hamilton was to announce his retirement at the end of the season, if I was Toto Wolff, I'd be straight on a blower to Lando Norris's representatives. I think the contract length would be the stickling point, but Lando Norris would be the guy that I'd be going for as at Mercedes if Lewis was to announce his retirement.
Yeah, so I'm just looking at social media right now on that one, and from what I've been hearing, early whispers are saying that Checo will still keep his win. Haven't heard anything on Max Verstappen at the moment regarding his third place. But from what I'm hearing, early whispers are saying that Checo is fine and that he will keep his victory. The Red Bull page is actually updated saying we're crying too, showing Perez crying, of course, with the national anthem of Mexico being played. So I'm guessing they probably know something that perhaps Checo gets to keep his P1. So I'll update that. I'll update you guys on that one when I know for certain. So I'm just keeping an eye on that one. But early whispers do indicate that Checo will keep his victory. So we'll have to wait and hear what happens with Max Verstappen regarding his third position. If he has the same fate or if he's going to be given a penalty, we'll have to wait and see. But yeah, I absolutely agree, guys, on Lando Norris. I think he's driving phenomenally well. I think the car has not been the easiest car to drive at times. You know, there is good balance to it, but again, it depends on, it can be quick at one race at the other. And Lando is certainly driving and extracting the most out of it right now in otherwise very difficult circumstances. And I think that should be something that isn't going under the radar. So we'll have to wait and see what happens regarding his future right now. Another driver whose future is certainly up at the air right now is Daniel Ricciardo. And this is a circuit that we kind of hope that he might be able to put something together to try and, curb those whispers and those noises, especially ones coming from his own boss, Zach Brown, that his contract situation is far from infallible at the moment. And once again, this weekend has not been a good one for Danny Ric. He didn't get it into Q2. He was quite, missed out there. And in the race, he just seemed to struggle for whatever reason. He just cannot seem to put it together right now. So I guess, guys, the question is, with all these increasing noises from his own team boss and people around him saying that his future at the team is far from uncertain and he's not delivering on what they were hoping for him, is the writing almost already on the wall for Daniel Ricciardo? And I never thought I'd say this, but it does feel right now that McLaren may already be looking at someone to replace him.
Yeah, it's a subject that I think, we're just talking from the heart. It's really difficult for us to talk about because not only is Daniel Ricciardo one of the most likable guys in the grid, I think he offers a lot for the sport, as a character, but also what he has to offer on the track. Like I remember Red Bull a few years ago, whenever Mercedes weren't on the game, it was always Danny Ric that was there picking up the pieces and getting those chaotic wins for Red Bull. His banzai style overtakes and aggressive driving style when it was needed. And it just seems that for whatever reason, during his time at McLaren, he's just not the guy that he used to be. And the way that the McLaren's going as a company, obviously, with Zach Brown being there, the ties with America is increasing, with connections to IndyCar and his links with a couple of the drivers from there. So from a business perspective, it'd be good for McLaren to bring one of those drivers in to increase their growing popularity for the McLaren team in particular from an American standpoint. That would make a lot of sense. So I know that they would ideally hold on to Dan Ricciardo if he had the pace, but they do have options in place if he continues to struggle. So the pressure is on him right now.
What are your thoughts on this one, Lee? Do you think Daniel Ricciardo can turn it around, or do you think McLaren at this point, as harsh as it may sound, should be looking at other options right now for that number 2 seat?
I think Daniel can turn it around, but he's running out of time to turn it around. As we saw last year in Monza and even at some other tracks last season, you saw glimmers of the Danny Ric from Red Bull, or even from his time at Renault, where he did some great drives for Renault. So he hasn't just stopped learning how to drive. It's just, as Courtney said, his aggressive driving style. Something about this McLaren last year and this year doesn't seem to work with the way he drives, and Danny's been very hard at or struggling to adapt to a new way of driving style. Or maybe on the other hand, maybe he has adapted and Lando is just completely destroying him and set McLaren's expectations so high that what they bought from Daniel Ricciardo is he's delivering. His performance hasn't changed, just Lando is just delivering so much more. So you could argue, is Lando almost doing a Verstappen effect to what Verstappen did to Pierre Gasly and Alex Albon? Is he doing that to Daniel Ricciardo? And if he gets replaced, which unfortunately if he doesn't improve is looking more likely, Lando could still do that to any incoming driver and destroy their Formula One career before it's even started, because Lando is just performing that brilliantly. So it is that kind of question, but Daniel does need to obviously get on top of it and try and find some more pace, or he's going to potentially be out by the end of the season.
Yeah, I mean, it does feel like right now that whilst Daniel's not being, how can I put this in the nicest way? Whilst Daniel is not driving as badly as perhaps some people, including ourselves, have made it out to be, it does feel like that this scaling of his performance has been, it's hard to really accurately judge it because of how well Lando is driving. And of course, I don't like the term outdriving the car, because it implies that, the driver can do more with the car than the car is capable of, which isn't possible, theoretically, logically speaking. Lando is possibly driving the car, hypothetically, let's say 99% of the car's full latent ability, maybe more than that, and Ricciardo's only doing about 95%. And of course, McLaren need Ricardo to be delivering more consistency in the upper echelons of that, like what Lando is doing. And perhaps it's making Ricardo look a worse driver than he actually is currently performing at the moment. And we've seen this with other drivers. We've seen Ricardo do this to Vettel back in 2014 when they were teammates. And of course, you know, and Leclerc when he came into Ferrari. I'll keep picking Vettel out here wrongly, but my point is. Sorry, Seb, I love you, but yeah, sorry, the first thing that comes to my mind on this. But my point is that sometimes
savage.
Yeah, I didn't mean to, but of all the drivers, I could have done that too. Anyway, look, I digress on that one. But my point is that you get a situation like Ricardo is in right now. He's trying to figure out how to solve this, and it's just not good, especially when your teammate is performing so much better than you. It makes it look like you're doing a worse job than perhaps you already are. And McLaren's patient, from what I understand, is starting to wear very, very thin right now. You know, Zach Brown's going out regularly and saying stuff like no one's contract is infallible, or there are certain stipulations in everybody's contract that allows a separation on both sides. That's not what you want your team boss to be saying about you. You want him to say, no, he's going to turn it around, it's going to be fine, we're not looking at other drivers, we're going to back the two that we have. It doesn't sound very, very positive. It's kind of got the hallmarks of a football club saying about their manager, we absolutely give him our full vote of confidence, and then they sack him a week later, as the old cliche often goes. So we'll have to wait and see on that one. Before we round this off, guys, because I'm looking at a few of the other races going on, like stories that we should talk about. I think Haas is certainly a big one this weekend. Haas showed a lot of early promise in qualifying. They looked very, very quick. Ultimately, it didn't quite work out for them, but in the race, Kevin Magnussen, I think it was a water pressure issue that caused him to retire. But then, of course, the big one was Mick Schumacher having that huge crash after the swimming pool chicane, where his car separated in half. Fortunately, Mick Schumacher was okay, and as I said earlier on the DNF1 Twitter, it's a true testament to how safety is con leaps and bounds that an impact like that can happen, and Mick Schumacher's able to walk away from that car a little bit bruised and a bit shaken up, but otherwise A-okay. But ultimately, it's another crash for Mick Schumacher. More points lost potentially for Haas in a race that, you know, if they'd taken advantage of the chaos that had gone on, they might have got more out of it. It certainly was on the cards for them. And there were some strong words from Gunther Steiner on this one. I'll read out what he had to say. He said that with Mick, we obviously saw what happened. It's not very satisfactory having a big crash. We need to see how we move forward from here. And then goes on to say that these crashes are starting to rack up more and more and more. And in a budget cap, the team with theoretically the smallest budget is now struggling to meet the budget cap. And we've heard noises from Ferrari claiming that they're not going to meet the budget cap at this point, and on top of everyone else that they claim aren't going to do it either. So with all that in mind, in this budget cap era, another accident from Mick Schumacher, and I don't know what happened there. It looked like the car, something gave up on him and it caused the incident rather than his own mistake, but it's another incident for him. Haas's patience must be wearing a little bit thin on Mick Schumacher right now. And again, another race where they could have picked up something and come away with nothing. So what are your thoughts with Haas at the moment, Courtney? That early season luster that they had has started to fade away quite dramatically.
I think, first of all, just want to say, like, how relieved I was to see that Mick was okay. When we first saw the footage of Jesus, the back wheels hanging off and the rear wing just being completely separated from the car, and then the way the camera's cut off, I thought for a moment, you know, you get those heart-sinking moments, you think this could potentially be a fatality. Luckily, it wasn't. I think that is the most important thing. But with Haas, I think that was always the main concern for Haas was always going to be, we know that with the regulations that were brought in last season, that because they were the bottom team, they were always going to have the most time to work on this year's cars. So they were going to come into this season with a bit of a jump. But the question was always going to be, can they sustain it? And so far, it does seem like they're going to be struggling to do so. I know they got a big upgrade package on the way, I think in France randomly, somewhere like that, I believe. And that's gonna really decide their season, because right now it does seem that, you know, at the beginning of the season there were times where they was even competing with the Mercedes. Now you're seeing the likes of Mercedes, McLaren, I think Alfa Romeo are solid, particularly with Valtteri Bottas. Alpine have been lucky. They've got a solid package there. And it does feel that Haas is slowly but surely going to slip back if they don't up their game. So I think that's probably another reason why Gunther Steiner is upset with the crashes because they need they need the money to develop the car, and if he's going on repairing the cars, it's just going to make them slip back and miss out on prize money.
Yeah, very much so. Lee, do you think that Mick Schumacher's possibly under some big pressure now to get the results?
I think he's under big pressure to get the results, not just from Haas and Gunther Steiner and Jean, but from being his Ferrari links as well. Obviously, when Mick joined the sport, he was obviously touted one of the future for Ferrari, being the son of Michael, and obviously living up to the name that the Schumacher name means in Formula One. And he outperformed his teammate last year, which I'm very from his opinion, it wasn't too hard. But Kevin came back and he's just shown him up since he stepped into Formula One car, and Kevin's been out of the sport for a year. So, and Mick has shown promise that he's going to be on level. Oh no, Mick's done the mistake. He's done it. Oh, Mick's made crash. So it's just the pressure's building up that Kevin is just beating him internally in the inter-team battle. The obviously pressure from both Ferrari in his development program, and obviously Jean and Gunther, and I think it's getting a bit too much for Mick, and maybe it's just showing that maybe he isn't good enough to deserve a driving Formula One, regardless of how well he performed in the junior categories.
Well, this is it, and there are plenty of other young drivers really snapping at the heels of a seat in F1 right now. We already have one on the wings that should already be in F1, in Oscar Piastri. So Mick Schumacher, despite the promise that he might have shown last season in a car that obviously had no standards really to measure him up against, has to start performing. The honeymoon period is over. He really has to start putting it together now, and I don't know really what more to say, really. I know it's unfortunate, and I'm really glad that he's okay, but he really needs to go away now and think about what he can do to improve his performance, and then come back in Baku, where I certainly hope he can put together a strong performance there. Time certainly is not on his side. He has to start delivering, because even Haas will start to become impatient if he's not delivering on results right now. One thing I did want to bring up, and I thought this was weird at the time, and I didn't want to say anything because I thought I was being silly, but it turns out I might actually have a point to this one. So, and I want you guys listening to this as well. If I'm wrong on this one, please feel free to correct me, or someone that might know more on this than I do, try to explain to me why I'm wrong on this one, or try and explain it for me so I understand it. But obviously the rule about the race clock, it's a 2-hour race. And when we had the original start behind the safety car, before the huge rain downpour, and we had to red flag it before we started it all going again, I was under the impression that the race clock did not start, the 2-hour race clock. Of course, the race has to be completed in 4 hours from the point where we actually start going to when it actually finishes. So we were well within that anyway, so that wasn't a factor. But of course, because the race finished at the end of the 2 hours, rather than the at the end of the full laps, because I think we've got like 64, 65 laps in rather than 77 or something like that. So I thought, okay, fair enough. But from what I understood, the clock hadn't actually started until around 16 minutes past 3. So how did we run out of time when the race finished around about 5 o'clock, which means it was less than 2 hours already, and we had a red flag period which in between, which I understood means that you stop the clock for the race, don't you? Because Crofty mentioned this during the race. He said the clock was still ticking down around 52 minutes left during the red flag, and he said, they'll probably reset it. But they didn't actually do that. So we didn't actually get a 2-hour race. So did anyone else see this, or was I the only person?
I think you're either completely right, Adam, and I'm with you on it. I think you are right on it. But I think even the fact that there isn't clarity on a matter, I just think shows that there are still massive problems with the stewarding, or the lack of consistent stewarding. Obviously, going back to what happened in Abu Dhabi, that's still a big deal, and it runs deeper for me. It's an opinion that I've held for quite a while now. I think the standard of stewarding has dropped considerably since Charlie Whiting unfortunately passed away. He was such a pioneer for the stewarding, and he's to this day, he's really is missed from the fans more than they may even know, because he kept the stewarding at such a high standard that the mistakes that are being made are becoming more and more noticeable as time passes.
Yeah, it was very odd because they didn't start the clock when they did the first formation laps. And I think if they did it after, at 15, 16 local or, British time or whatever it was, for me, I'm trying to do the maths in my head and I thought, why is the clock still ticking down during a red flag? And, why did we run out of time? If that was the case, I might be wrong and someone can explain to me if they know, what the rationale was, but it just felt like, and nobody questioned it. It was really, really strange that we ended up running out of time when it felt to me that we still had time to at least, get a few more laps in. I don't know. So with all that being said, Lee, does this mean we need to start looking at bringing Michael Massey back?
Probably not.
That's all right, guys. It's not a serious suggestion, but I saw a lot of that on social media joking around. I think it was it Battery Voltas, the meme page on Twitter, and he had a picture of the meme with Wolverine, obviously looking at an old photo, and it's a picture of Michael Massey in there, and he's sort of stroking it. I was just like, yeah, might be funny.
No, bring back Charlie Whiting. That's it.
If only we could. If only we could.
I'll tell you what, though, Adam. I'll tell you what. If you was to put on the thumbnail, should we bring back Michael Massey? I'll tell you what. I bet this episode would get plenty of views.
Oh yeah, that would get views. That would certainly get views. And unfortunately, we'd have to disappoint a lot of people that we waited until now to actually bring up that point. But let us know, guys. Should we bring back Michael Massey? Go on then. It's just a bit of fun. Please don't hurt us. No. Please don't cancel us. Yeah. Anyway, look, guys, I think we can wrap this up here. Just some final thoughts about what we've seen so far this weekend and, how that plays into the title fight going forward. Because right now, it looks like we've got a three-way title fight right now.
Yeah, I think Ferrari have pace. I think that the next couple of races, Ferrari can win, but I think they need to. And I think the one crumb of comfort that Ferrari can take is that Sainz had by far his best weekend of the season. So I think a Ferrari 1-2 is on the cards. And I've got a feeling it's going to come in Baku or Canada, but it needs to.
Yeah, it sounds about right. Lee, what are your final thoughts?
Well, I was going to touch on what Courtney said about Carlos. There's one thing we've all been saying is Carlos needs a clean weekend to get his confidence up and understand the car. He's had that. So it's now about what Carlos can bring going forward to be on par performance with Charles and maximise the potential of the car. And if Carlos can now do that, now he's had a nice clean weekend, solid result, the Ferrari can get themselves back in the constructors' fight against Red Bull. I have no doubt about that, as if they got both drivers performing. One thing sure, I'm sure we'll have some very exciting races to come.
Yeah, I certainly hope so. And of course, it bodes well for this championship right now that, despite these issues, we still have a very much alive championship. And of course, let's not forget, now that it could be a three-way championship with Checo right in the mix, it may cause problems for Red Bull. One that they probably hope they wouldn't have to deal with. And perhaps after what happened in Spain, when that settles down and Checo think, actually, I could win this, it may cause something that might break at Red Bull that might allow
multi-21.
Maybe we might get a multi-21 in 2022. There you go. You don't get that. That's why this podcast is loved by so many people. Useless puns like that. But look, I think that's all we've got time for, guys. Just as a recap on the updates and what's going on with the race results, I'm hearing a few more people saying that Checo is keeping the P1, so he's got the victory by the sounds of it. We haven't had anything confirmed yet from F1 or any journalists that we usually go to for information or stuff like that. Not to discredit any that or have already jumped the gun, but I haven't heard any sort of more concrete reports yet. So we'll have to wait and see on that one. I think Carlos Sainz on his social media has just said it's P2 for him. So I think they probably know that the result is there for Checo Perez. We haven't heard anything on Max Verstappen yet. So we're still going to have to wait and see if Max Verstappen is given a 5-second time penalty, which would, of course, promote Charles Leclerc ahead of him into P3. We'll have to wait and see. By the time that this podcast comes out, I'm sure you guys will probably know the answer to that one anyway. But until next time, guys, thank you so much for tuning in. If you have enjoyed this episode, please remember to like the video and consider subscribing to the channel. Of course, we've got our qualifying watch-alongs that we do now. We did our last one with Kira and Megan, so thank you, Kira, for joining us for that one. I'm sure she'll definitely come back for others in the future. But until next time, guys, thanks for tuning in. Stay safe, and we'll see you in the next episode of the DNF1 F1 podcast. Take care.
See you soon.
Goodbye.